Good evening, everyone.
It's Friday, 8 p.m.
I'm Andy.
And I'm Debs.
Welcome to Codes of the Unknown.
Don't be afraid.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. So, Philip and Ronald have got a prior engagement that's actually run over, so they couldn't be here tonight. But our guest tonight was recently promoted to State Director of MUFON in California. Let's have a big warm UK welcome for Earl Grey. Good evening,
Hello.
Earl.
Hi there, you guys. How's it going?
Lovely to have you on.
Look, it's a round world. It's dark where you're at, and it's
I
all
know.
sunshine here.
Yeah,
Very.
So much for flat Earth theory, right? Not that it really
I don't know. I've been
wasn't.
looking into that lately. I've got a foot either side of the fence at the moment.
Watch you don't fall off it.
Yeah, that's
Yay.
true. If it was flat, my cats would have pushed everything off of it by now.
Yeah, so would mine. Mind you's not bothered about doing things like that. He'd rather have treats.
Oh, goodness.
Let's get into how you first started with all this then, for
Yes.
people that don't know.
Sure. Well, you'd like to know how I got into my interest with UFOs in the first place, then?
Yeah.
It's
Please.
been kind of, in a way, a lifelong thing. Back when I was 5 years old, my mom had a really strange conversation with me. My mom talked about, we all knew that she worked for Howard Hughes back in the 1950s. That was something that our family knew. Everybody was kind of aware of that she was one of Hughes' two private secretaries. We all know that we've seen the film The Aviator, and it was pretty accurate. I mean, he was sort of a misanthrope and kept to himself, a germaphobe. And so as long as my mom worked for him, she only saw him in person one time. And she wasn't supposed to. At the end of the day, they would let him leave at first, because he did like to drive himself. They had their little parking lot, and there was a long hallway that led to their parking garage area there at Hughes Aircraft, and it was in Santa Monica area. So anyhow, they would give them the all clear, and then they would get to leave, the people that worked at Hughes. So my mom, they got the all clear, and my mom was kind of in a hurry to go somewhere, and she opened the door to the hallway, and there was Howard Hughes at the end of the hallway, looking very Chaplin-esque, is the way she described him. He had his hat on, a little suitcase, and he kind of had a wobbly walk, because at this point he had been in this terrible plane crash in Los Angeles. It was in the film. So anyway, he stopped walking, it just like looked like he was horrified. he froze like the deer in the headlights. And then quickly he just like jammed through that door. He was gone. That was the only time my mom ever saw him. The rest of the time they would communicate over like they had an early monitor, PA system kind of thing that they would use, almost like that old the Charlie's Angels TV show.
Oh yeah.
It's the way I think of it,
Yeah.
So anyway, there were two secretaries. Howard Hughes did like to he liked his ladies. He did like to send them out. He trusted women more than he trusted men, is what I've heard from people over the years now.
Yeah.
You can imagine I've done a lot of research into this.
Yeah.
So my mom, the story that she told me when I was 5 years old that was so very strange was that she talked about working in this city that was under the desert. She said that, she told me the whole story. I was just a little boy.
Yeah.
But she said that they sent her with like a security detail, like a couple of guys, is the way that she, put it.
Yeah.
Security guys. And she didn't say if they flew there, but I imagine they I don't know. It depends on what desert this was in,
Yeah.
Las Vegas is, within driving distance, but if it was Area 51, they probably flew her in.
Yeah.
But she said that it was in the middle of nowhere, that there was this shack in the desert, and that it was chained up and locked up, and they opened it, and there was an elevator inside of this shack, and it just went it went down. There was no up to go to.
Yeah.
And this shack didn't look like much. It just looked sort of like, just a concrete, little concrete building in the middle of
Like a
nowhere.
garage, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So she got in the elevator with these guys, and she thought it would probably go down a floor or two, and it kept going. And kept going. And my mom said that she felt kind of scared, that she felt butterflies in her stomach. And I remember her using that expression because as a kid, I think that might have been the first time I ever heard that expression.
Yeah.
That she had butterflies in her stomach. She said that the doors opened up, and that there was a virtual actual city that was down there with lots of people that lived there long periods of time. A lot of scientists. They got around in golf carts.
Yeah.
She said that they had like bowling alley, a movie theater. They had a cafe, and she mentioned this cafe. She laughed. She said, "Well, I remember it had these yellow umbrellas, like you'd see in a little French cafe, and you don't need an umbrella if you're in a cave."
No.
Then she kind of giggled at that, but I guess they were trying to keep everybody so that they felt at home and so that they didn't feel claustrophobic. And so I lived with that information for a long time, which was a weird story, but my mom told it, and my mom was not the purveyor of wild and crazy stories,
Yeah.
She was pretty down to earth. So anyway, the years went by, and my mom seemed like she was very bored being a housewife. As soon as I was old enough, I was in high school, she went back to work with an employment agency, which she kind of took over. She was running this. It was called Manpower Employment Agency, but they were using her to people, all the aerospace companies in Southern California. She was getting people out to Northrop, to Raytheon, Rockwell Science Center that was out in Thousand Oaks. My mom, I know that she pretty much hired everybody from scientists down to broom pushers.
Yeah.
And that Rockwell Science Center, they built the space shuttle. And my mom, later on in her life, back in the 1990s, she went to work for Lockheed Skunk Works in particular. I remember her when she would talk with Ben Rich, the head of Lockheed back then. And when I read it, now I'm sort of an aerospace enthusiast, and Ben's name comes up all the time. It's like, I remember my mom talking about him.
Yeah.
But you never know what she was dealing with, because she wrote everything in like the secretary's shorthand that they used to use back in the day. So it could be you couldn't read her shopping lists. Everything that she wrote was in this strange, crazy, loopy shorthand. Well, the funny thing, my mom also tended to talk about life in outer space. And she spoke about it. She didn't say why she knew so much about it, but she didn't speak about it like it was a hypothetical. She spoke about it as though it was a known.
Yeah.
She spoke about it with authority. I remember that my aunt came over. My cousins were visiting, and she brought the Look magazine, which was sort of a Life magazine knockoff in the 60s. But it was the first publication of the Betty and Barney Hill story. And I remember things getting kind of noisy in the kitchen between my mom and my aunt, their younger sister. So my cousins and I, we kind of snuck up to the door to hear what they were arguing about. And it was that the Betty and Barney Hill incident.
Yeah.
And my mom was kind of emphatic. She was saying, I think from what I know, this sounds like something that I think really happened, Mary. I think this really, really happened.
Yeah.
And and my aunt was just kind of recoiling at it. She's going, this is like a bad horror movie. It's like bad science fiction. And my mom said, well, but from what I know, it sounds like what's been going on. I remembered my aunt mentioned, well, they stuck a needle into her navel, and I had to like bug my cousin, say, what's a navel? What's a navel? I was like 8 years old at the time. And my cousin, the belly button.
Yeah.
So I remember kind of after this argument that we overheard on the sly, I remember going into our backyard and just feeling like star crash. I felt like the sky was literally falling around me. I think the word is ontological shock. And I think that's the first time I ever experienced ontological shock, where my sense of reality was pulled out from under me like a rug at a very young age. Later on in 1977, well, my mom, every once in a while, she would talk a little bit about working in the underground base. That was not off limits, but she didn't like to talk about it. She wasn't supposed to talk about it. I got like a lecture when I was 10 years old because I kept bringing it up and even brought it up in school. My mom heard about it, and she told me that, your mom could go to prison for this. You can't. People don't know about this, son. I wasn't supposed to tell you what I told you, but you were only 5 years old. I thought you'd forget, and here you are, you bringing it up
Telling
over
everyone.
and over again. So, but my mom, a very sad thing is she kept getting cancers through her life. The first one was right after I was born, and she had unrelated, non-metastatic cancer about 6 times. Last time it got her, sadly.
Yeah.
Back in 1999. But 1977, I accompanied her to her oncologist. She got a checkup and everything was beautiful, perfect. And my mom was in a good mood. And there was this new movie that was playing called Star Wars. It'd been out for like 2 days.
Yeah.
And I said, let's go see this movie. This looks cool. And we'll go do lunch and let's go see this film. It's got really reviews here in Time magazine. And so we went, and lo and behold, I think that my mom and I were the only 2 people in that theater. It was the second day it was out. Nobody knew about it yet. The Time magazine article had just come out. It came out that morning, and we had gone to, I think that it was the matinee. It was early in the day.
Yeah.
So we were the only people in that theater. When the film was over and the curtains were closing, my mom started talking and talking and talking to the point where I felt uncomfortable. I was feeling the ontological shock thing again. She was saying, son, you have no idea how close to the truth that movie was. The different creatures from other planets, the spaceships, wars in space, the whole thing. She said, it's realer than you'll probably ever know, son. She said, it's realer than you're ever going to know. because they're never going to tell the public about this. They won't tell the public because it would scare them, it would horrify them,
Yeah.
it could destroy world religions and else what. But it's really real. And, and again, it's like we're driving home, and this is all running through my head. And at the time, I was a pre-seminary student. I was taking some, I was thinking of becoming a minister. I was, kind of had gone through my rebellious period, and later in my teenage years, I cleaned up to the point where and there was really no room in my universe for aliens at that point. And here's my mom talking about this, and it threw me, it threw a spanner in my works,
Yeah.
So over the years, I'd try to get her to talk more. She usually wouldn't. Once in a while she would, but generally she'd get frustrated. She'd raise an eyebrow like Spock and walk away, But on her deathbed, my mom and she got cancer yet again. And this time she was dying from it.
Yeah.
And I wanted her to go after the government. I felt like they hadn't protected her.
Yeah.
That this must have happened when she was working underground. And you have to I figured it out back then. It's like, well, you have to power this city somehow. It wasn't going off the grid because people would see the power suck. It's like a little city down there. So it would have had to have had its own power source. And I just figure it must have been like a nuclear power source. Like you'd have in a submarine, the same kind of thing. I think they just didn't know how to shield people from it properly back then. And this is the repercussions of it. So, but I talked with her about this, and my mom said I would never, ever sue my government. She said, I was working for them, son. This was, this is my patriotic duty. And just like a soldier would come into risk in their life, this is what I came in touch with. There was a risk element. I knew that to begin with. And I'm perfectly happy with what I did. I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she did kind of reaffirm everything that, working in the deep underground military base, she reaffirmed that there is life in the universe. She didn't give me details. And it was still the attitude of it's realer than you'll ever know.
Yeah.
And I think that phrase stuck with me.
Yeah.
So, Andy and Deborah, it eventually led me to read a lot of books about UFOs.
Yeah.
I thought a lot of them were kind of silly, and most of them I'd put down half, I'd get in a couple chapters.
Yeah.
But I ran into Leslie Kean's book back in 2010 about UFOs, pilots, generals. The book The Day After Roswell by Philip Corso had a lot of, as inaccurate as certain parts of that book apparently are. Bill Burr, who is the co-author, kind of embellished things here and there, is what I've heard. Yeah. But there was enough of the actual story there that gelled with what my mom said.
Yeah.
Underground basing was in there, the connection to that and alien life. And so this all kind of eventually led me to join MUFON. The name MUFON kept coming up over and over in the books.
Yeah.
And I finally decided, I'm reading everything, and there's so many different opinions. Apparently I need to do this myself. If I want to know the truth, I need to go hands-on with this. And so 2015 is when I joined MUFON, and I became a field investigator that year. So it was a little over 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And it really changed my life, I'll tell you. I mean, I think that it's possible. Maybe I know more than a lot of people with security clearances know now. I think my mom was in a special place back in the 1950s. They didn't compartmentalize like they do. So I think my mom kind of got the whole story. And she knew people like Werner von Braun was a friend. And she would say that, he'd be on Disney, Wonderful World of Disney or something. And she'd go, oh, that's my old friend Werner there,
Yeah.
And she would say, he used to call me Betty Grace. My mom's name was Betty Grace. Maiden was her maiden name, which causes a lot of laughter when people ask me your mother's maiden. But a security question sometimes. But she, Betty Grace, that was her first and middle name. Apparently Werner called her Betty Gray. So they were friends. And so he was head of the Apollo program. He was the earliest guy to put our rocketry into place to where we were able to reach the moon in 1969. And my mom worked for Hughes back. She was part of the Redstone program. She knew all about that, which was the precursor to Gemini space shots.
Yeah.
And in fact, they used a Redstone rocket for the first Mercury launch. And so my mom was part of all that. And I guess it runs in the family.
Yeah, definitely. It's a shame she didn't write
Yeah.
a book, though. That would have been a fantastic book.
I know.
Well, maybe. I know I've got a couple books in me. It's just, when do I write them?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
When are you gonna
I
get
don't even
time?
have time to pick a guitar up anymore. That was
Yeah.
my old, my obsession. But I'm so very, very busy with the UFO phenomenon. It seems to have taken over my life, and I
Well,
like it, though.
There's a lot of reports from your area of the world, isn't there?
Yeah.
We, here's the thing: is Southern California is the world's greatest hotspot for UFO sightings. I think some of it we may be seeing some of our government secret UFOs. Ben Rich from Lockheed Skunk Works talked about that we had the ability to take ET back home, but it's all locked up in black projects and the public will never see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost a reiteration of what my mom said. It's realer than you'll ever know. They're never going to tell the public.
Yeah.
And that was Ben Rich in a lecture that he gave at UCLA back in the early 90s, that we have the ability to take ET home.
Yeah.
But the public will never know. And what does that mean? I mean, it's supposed to be impossible to go close to the speed of light. And that would be the only way that we could take ET home.
Yeah.
So apparently we have our own, and he says he said that we had our own UFOs that were black projects, and that they were sometimes mistaken for ET.
Yeah.
But there are also ET UFOs. We are not alone in this universe, not hardly. And I think that we've been visited since antiquity.
Yeah.
The more that I dig into this phenomena, the stranger it gets. I think they even tailor the way that their machines look so that they don't completely baffle us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You look at UFOs back in the 1950s; they were more like, more like this guy. They were very nuts and bolts. They looked like they could have come out of a factory or something.
Yeah.
And now they're very alien looking, the things that people see, other than the black triangles. And I think that those may be ours.
Yeah.
Because they all look like they came off a conveyor belt. And I've got aerospace engineers to police chiefs, etc., that have seen these up close and personal. And they describe there being piping inside of them. You don't hear that with UFOs.
No, that's the thing.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry, I was just going to say, first question.
There you go.
I see.
Did your mother ever mention portals or wormholes to you?
She never mentioned it. Mentioned it. But I think that's how they get around.
Yeah.
The more that I look into this phenomena and just some stuff that I've experienced myself, because the closer that you get to this phenomenon, it's an interactive phenomenon. You poke at the universe, you can't be surprised if it pokes back at you. I'm not sure if she ever did see an ET, Nancy. That was the next question. Did she ever see an ET? She sure spoke with authority about them. And she was, if we had ETs or if there were bodies from the Roswell crash at that point, I would guess that they would be underground somewhere. Now I've heard Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was one place. White Sands, apparently they have an underground facility there. Scott Carpenter, the old Gemini astronaut, saw UFOs at White Sands. He literally saw a flying saucer there. And he said that it's kind of one of those memes that you hear that they had bodies there. So And who knows, maybe my mom was at White Sands. I really don't know. I've looked into this. Richard Sauter is a gentleman who's written a few books about deep underground military bases. And what I found interesting was that Howard Hughes actually had the first commissioned lab at Area 51 that wasn't part of Skunk Works, or that wasn't just straight ahead Pentagon. That it was a commissioned lab. So maybe it was Area 51. I don't know. There's I have it on good authority that there's another, there's an underground base that has multiple levels, like over 20 levels. It's in Temecula, California.
Yeah.
Supposedly Northrop owns that one. And my mom did a lot of work with Northrop. So anyone, I was just asked by nickname, has anyone living who knew your mom given you more information? I have heard from certain people that worked for the Pentagon that indeed my mom did work for Lockheed Skunk Works, and that she had her fingers in a lot of the stuff that was going on there. And that there was even, I was told, and I don't know, I mean, whenever I hear something from somebody from the Pentagon, I have to kind of put it in that maybe box, because they are known to put out disinformation purposefully sometimes, but sometimes they give you good information. So I'm not sure. They haven't had me take any security oaths. I think that's a good thing, because I can talk about this and I can and I can know more than I would if I had taken a security oath. If I had signed non-disclosure agreements, I would only know the part of this phenomena that was relevant to what I was doing. So I think that maybe that's the reason why not. They haven't done that. And I have had some disclosure that seemed like it was official. And according to, them, my mom did work for the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And with ET related stuff. This was just recently, the last 6 months, where I was told this. I don't know if I should tell you the name. You'd probably you'd know the name, I think. But it was an important person who worked with Bigelow in that group for a long time. And it continues to work in the scientific end for the Pentagon. So that was what I was told. So there you go. That's a good, nice confirmation. The first time I've gotten it, other than from my mom or from, my mom's best friend back when I was a child. We called her Aunt Ellen, but she was my mom's friend from work. Yeah. And she worked for Rand Corporation. Rand is who worked with I've found out the Rand Corporation it was originally part of Hughes Aircraft. Right. Hughes made his fortune not through aerospace, but by coming up with a better drill bit. He's very interested in drilling and kind of what Elon Musk is doing right now. Same, Elon, I think he based a lot of what he's doing on Howard Hughes. Yeah. And it was the same thing, where he has his boring company. So did Howard Hughes. And he came up with a better drill bit. And he was working with the Rand Corporation, who does our underground bases. We know this because this has been disclosed officially, that they were working with the Army Corps of Engineers, who've built a lot of the edifices and things that we see, dams and stuff like that. Yeah. And so it all kind of makes sense. And I know my aunt she would play dumb, but you would hear her and my mom talking, and she was anything but. She was smart as a tack. And I heard a lot of confirmation from her just when I was a kid. So, but they're both gone now. Yeah. But I've recently gotten some interesting news from some guys that work for Bigelow. So there you go.
I've just got one quick question.
Sure.
Can I ask you, what is your take on the Men in Black?
I think it's a real thing. Yeah. I think that I think that perhaps some of the Men in Black are ETs that are perhaps in avatar bodies, that they're here to keep us from nosing around in certain areas.
Yeah.
They do want to. They do want to decide what is disclosed, when it's disclosed. I think that they could are absolutely could have landed on the White House lawn by now,
Yeah.
multiple times, but I don't think they want to. I think that the way it is right now, they're still studying us. They're working sort of behind the scenes. I think that I believe that they're trying to change our baseline reality. That they're trying to change us as a species, from case to case to case. Where there's alien contact, people are given visions of nuclear holocaust and warnings about nuclear war and war in general. That humanity, that there's a great risk of us wiping ourselves out and wiping ourselves off the map. And so I think that the best way for them to deal with this is still behind the scenes. When they appear, that's going to be a problem. I've heard from somebody who another person who was connected with the Pentagon, that I was told that if they come and they take over, it's a known quantity that will be their slaves. It'll mean that we have not been able to save ourselves and that we need a babysitter for forever.
Yeah.
So we don't want them to disclose. We want our own species to change, and I see so many of our problems are that we still think in Newtonian terms of the universe. It's very nuts and bolts to us, but the way that things work, it's all quantum mechanics, and it's quantum physics is what the universe is based on, and string theory, which when you look at it, it's like magic. But Arthur Clarke, one of my favorite authors, he said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
And that's what we see when we have our UFO encounters or encounters with beings. It seems like magic sometimes, but their technology is just so far advanced from ours.
Definitely.
And if you look at quantum mechanics, it's not unusual for something to appear and disappear and appear somewhere else. And that's what UFOs do. Spooky action at a distance, a particle in the next galaxy over can affect a particle that's here. This isn't theory. We know this. They've been able to prove this stuff. And this is the way it's UFOs, and the UFO phenomenon is really the same as like subatomic particle physics, except it's big stuff that's acting like the smallest stuff. And that acts exactly the same way. Even shape shifting is a thing in the natural world. They did the double slit experiment where they shot two photons through two slits, and depending on what the scientist was expecting to see, it's an interactive universe. If they were expecting it to take on the form of a wave, that's what they would see. If they were expecting it to look like a particle, that's what they would see. And they actually came up with a nonsense word called a wavicle.
I like that.
A wavicle. It doesn't make it's just it's nonsense, but they had to call it something. They don't understand it. And technically it's a physical object that's naturally changing shape depending on what people expect it to take on,
Clever stuff.
Yes. So, we see this with ufology, like people, the CE5 thing works. It really, truly does. My scientific mind recoils against that, but it's true. People actually it seems like they're able to be, bring UFOs to themselves, are able to have an encounter if they really want one, going into a meditative or trance-like state and having that communication. Let's see here. I'm being asked, what is Earl's view on the whole SSP piece as described by Michael Salla and William Tompkins? Oh boy, that's a good question. My oh my. I was saying earlier that anything that's from the Pentagon, that you always have to remember that there's as much chance for there to be disinformation as there is for there to be good information.
Yeah.
Howard Hughes, the jump room and all that stuff that you hear about, I don't think that's true. I don't think my mom could have restrained herself from telling me about it if it had been there, you know. And plus, you know, I don't put a lot of credence into a lot of these guys' theories, but you know, I do think that we have a secret space program. I definitely think that the black triangles are ours.
Yeah.
And I think that we've probably, it would not surprise me if we've been to the moon again or to Mars or elsewhere, you know, further. But we don't know. We don't know. The public's not privy to that information. And I think there's a lot of disinformation out there to kind of obfuscate what's really happening.
Definitely.
Yes. Yeah. But I do know there is a secret space program, though. That's been confirmed to me.
Wow.
Ha. So I would be asked, do you think your mom guided you away from the seminary so you might eventually pick up ton? I don't think so. I think that my mom was kind of protective of me, and now her position and the people she knew back when I was a rebellious teenager, I think she was able to get me out of trouble quite a bit when I was a teenager. But you know, just the fact that she was very reticent about what she told me, she was careful about it, and she seemed like she felt guilty after she did disclose stuff to me. It was almost like she knew how much I loved this stuff and how much I wanted to know. And I think she told me as much as she legally could. She probably went over that. The people that I spoke with from the Pentagon that I've had some communication with said that that they knew about, they knew my mom, and they knew that they had heard that, and that my mom had talked about me, that she had told them that I knew a little bit more than I was supposed to know.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think that I really don't think my mom wanted me to pick up the baton.
No.
I wonder if she would be horrified or thrilled with what I'm doing right now.
I think she'd be thrilled.
I hope so.
Yeah,
She sure did. She was such a huge an influence in my life. I think that I picked up a lot of, you know, my mom was known to be empathic and kind and good to people. I you know, would see her, you know, give people grocery money and stuff like that, you know, just absolute strangers. She had a heart. And I know that I got that, inherited that from her, as well as my dad was the same.
Yeah.
My dad was kind of religious now, and that I think that kind of bothered my mom sometimes because he could be sort of overbearing with it. So she might have been glad that I didn't go to seminary. I don't know.
Because there would have been two of you.
It's helped me though, you know, the fact that I did learn, you know, I mean, things like the Book of Enoch, you know, that isn't even in the Protestant Bible. I believe talks about the Watchers and that they were a real thing, that they still are. You know, I think we still have Watchers here on Earth. Those are our alien brothers and sisters that have taken on human form. Where all that DNA went. People wonder why they were taking so much DNA during abductions. I've been told that there are people with avatar bodies that live here that are not people, you know, that are from other, you know, dimensions or systems. I have lots of compelling cases. You want me to talk about some compelling cases?
Yes.
Certainly do that.
Yeah.
I actually, it's funny that you ask, because I do have some cases here. Well, let's see here. You know, let's talk about. Somebody was asking about the secret space program. For some reason, some of the cases that we get just have they sound like human cases to me. It doesn't sound like your proverbial. Usually, if somebody sees a UFO close up, that's an alien UFO, it's ET origin. There's a reason for it. Usually it opens the door for that person. Either they're taken, they're abducted right then and there, or it seems to have that influence in their life. It opens up sort of a portal in their own lives where they begin to be taken at a later date. And we've seen that from case to case to case. But this one was kind of an interesting. If I can get the case file here for you.
Yeah. It's all right. Don't rush.
Okay. Oh, I got it right here. I'll show you a photograph of the vehicle that this guy saw. I could bring it up on my computer.
Oh, right.
But you can see that.
Yeah, that's clear.
That it was a
I've seen
wedge-shaped craft. That this thing,
Yeah.
the way he described it, is looking like a flying aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
That it had different levels to it, that you could see people walking on decks. But this thing was flying. They saw it. They were. I'll just read some of the case file.
Yeah.
The witness and two friends were on a weekend camping fishing trip at Lake Silverwood near Big Bear. Driving in a rural area. By the way, the witness did not live in that area. Otherwise, I wouldn't give you the locale.
Right. Yeah.
But he's an aerospace engineer. He actually does the plating of components for jet fighters.
Yeah.
It works for a major aerospace company. I'm not going to tell you which one. But we were driving in a rural area and observed a bright amber light flying silently and low in the distance. The object didn't have proper FAA lighting. This guy, he would look for that. The witness pulled his truck over to the shoulder, and all three witnesses got out of the truck, were leaning on the bumper, watching as the object slowly approached their position. As the object approached, it resolved into an object which the witness described as a black boomerang wedge shape, like a giant pair of wraparound sunglasses. It says witness illustration below. It's the one I just showed you guys. As the object got closer, it blocked out the stars themselves. All three witnesses could hear a low humming sound when it was directly above them. Quote unquote, we could feel it in our bones. It was actually quite uncomfortable. The witness's friend made sure that the truck engine was turned off, as he had heard that UFOs can cause car electrical systems to burn out.
Yeah.
And that's true. I was recently on Motor Mythbusters, which is a spin-off TV show for Mythbusters, and
Yeah.
we did they did those various experiments. One of them was using a military grade EMP, electromagnetic pulse, see what it would do to the electrical system. The car didn't like it.
Right.
There we are. That's
Yeah.
on the show. So anyway. So let's see here. What else I could tell? I some of this I can't read because it's too personal, and you'd possibly be able to figure out who he was. But he said that he does electroplating work for a major aircraft company, and that he said, I know my aircraft have been spotting planes all my life. I've never seen anything like what we witnessed. I was not into UFOs. We all saw it. My best, who passed away last year, was there as well. He was afraid to report this, even though I did know about MUFON when we had our sighting. After my friend passed away, it finally freed me up to put my report in, and that's what I did. He said, I'm not sure if that was ours or theirs, but I'm hoping that you can help me figure that out. It looked like a flying aircraft carrier. I hope it was ours, though I'm doubtful. Witness was interviewed 3 times over 4 months, never changed his story, never embellished a single word of his sighting report. The witness's work badges reflect who he is and his position in a major aircraft company. Let's see. There's a bit more. So it said, we noticed there was a light on the bottom of the object that was huge. The front of the object looked like wraparound sunglasses, and you were able to see through it. It was transparent. We counted 4 decks thick, and we were talking to each other. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. You could see columns from deck to deck, and on the uppermost deck, we could see humanoid figures moving about. It was like seeing some guy that was looking out at the scenery or something. Let's see. As it continued to pass directly over us, it blacked out a good portion of the sky. Everything to be crackling with electricity, and I could feel my insides humming. Thinking of it now, I'm really glad that I turned off my truck. Uh, as we were looking at the back of the craft, there were 4 boxes that were louvered and they shimmered like a road on a hot summer day. And we hear that from case to case. It looks like a mirage effect where on a hot day you'll see the road kind of waver, and that it's like these craft are surrounded with some kind of a force field like that. And I have my own, my own ideas about what that force field is. That, there are many, many cases. I'll read another one, a local case where it was a full family that had a close encounter with a classic looking flying saucer. But the same thing, everybody describes this thing called the Oz effect, where when you get close to a real UFO within 50 feet or closer, time seems to slow down. It becomes very, very quiet, unnaturally quiet. Like you won't hear external sounds from the traffic sounds.
Yeah.
I've had a weird encounter myself. I may talk about it, depending on how long of, I guess we've got another hour or so. So I'm sure I could talk about it. But in the encounter I had, we experienced, our room became absolutely quiet, flooded with light. And it was almost like it put me into a trance-like state. I think of it, I express it as a hypnagogic state.
Yeah.
And everybody seems to recount this when they have a close encounter, whether it's with entities or it's with a craft.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't surprise me that they described, all this strange stuff that they felt when this thing was close up. It's very common. And the idea of this wavering mirage-like thing, like a coating that they're seeing around these objects. The Tic Tac, the famous UFO that they saw off of the coast of California here in 2004, people ask when disclosure is going to happen. And I believe that it did happen. It happened in 2017 when the New York Times put they had an article on the front page about the Tic Tac encounter. My good friend Kevin Day was the radar deck, he was the strike force commander and was the guy that first saw these objects that were coming from low Earth orbit, shooting down to sea level, hovering there, and then shooting back up. And they were watching this for a week. They thought that the radar was having problems.
Wow.
And it was a disturbing thing because it was a very expensive new radar system. The last thing they wanted to be having problems with was national security situation. After seeing this stuff for a week, Kevin finally told them, they said, you need to send a squadron of planes out there. And they did. And then the rest is history. They encountered the Tic Tac that they call the Tic Tac, which was this UFO that was 40 feet across. It was traveling at Mach 18 when the squadron of planes got close to it. Though it was traveling at Mach 18 times the speed of sound, it didn't make a single sonic boom, not one. That's impossible.
Yeah,
but
that's speed.
We have it on video. So they have this magical thing that it's impossible, but there it is. It did 90-degree turns at that speed. It should have turned into a fireball. That's why meteors become meteors, why they are flaming and have ejecta coming from them and a tail, because they burn up going just the speed and this was going faster than a meteor. This was going like 18 times faster.
Yeah.
Huge object. Should have become a meteor. It didn't. And I believe they also expressed the same thing, that there seemed to be like this mirage effect. And I think that they carry that it's almost like they wrap it around with their own universe, that they create a little bubble universe that has its own rules, its own physical laws, and they're different from ours. They've learned how to manipulate the physical laws of the universe. And this makes it so that they can come into our rooms. They can take people up through the ceiling, which is very common
Yeah.
in abduction cases, case to case to case. I could, read you 40 different cases like that I've closed myself, where they describe, being taken through a closed window or through a ceiling. Nancy Malcolm is asking, did your mother ever know about experiments in large holograms that could be projected into the sky? No, she never talked about that. I don't know if it's a thing. It might be. I mean, you hear all kinds of stuff out there.
There's
So
there's a theory. There's a theory in that that's what the moon is. The hologram that's being projected into the sky.
No, we've been to the moon. My mom knew all those guys. I'm very good friends with Renario Hernandez, who runs the Free Group. Is the best, it's MUFON's ERT sister group. I'm a member of MUFON's experiencer resource team.
Yeah.
And the Free Group is Ray's group, and it was started by an Apollo astronaut who did, these guys went to the moon. So I know that it's a popular theory out there that we never went, but we did actually go. We had reasons to go. It was either that or go to war with Russia, which would have been the end of the world, mutually assured destruction. So that's why we did that. It was a way to beat Russia without taking lives. Which beings do I believe are the most benevolent? Boy, I've heard of beings from every tribe being benevolent sometimes. Even some reptilians I've heard are not bad and are actually, pro-human and don't hate us. Although that's kind of an oddity. There is a reason why the rumors of the Dracos and reptilians are pretty well, they're a warlike species.
Yeah. Cannibals as well.
Are they? I didn't hear that one, but
allegedly. Yeah.
Nice.
Interestingly enough, I hear that the mantis creatures are very, very compassionate. That apparently they tend to be the pilots, commanders, and also the doctors and the psychologists.
All right.
Can I speak of the information that I was given from Robert Bigelow? Some of it I can and some I can't. And it wasn't from Bigelow. It was from one of his main scientists. We talked about the Skinwalker stuff. And it was real. It's real, and there's actually one Skinwalker creature that was known to the government that I've been told was retrieved from a crash retrieval. I mean, again, there's disinformation thrown in with every bit of information, but we know there have been crash retrievals. So I have no reason to question this. And I was told that they brought this person that was actually an alien in an avatar body that had the ability to change into a wolf. And it's true. I mean, there's a book out right now called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon.
Yes, there is.
And they had to rewrite the book a couple of times because the Department of Defense, they decided he was telling too much.
Yeah.
So I think it was frustrating for those guys. But Colm Kelleher is a very well-respected biochemist who works for Bigelow, and he was one of the authors, as was George Knapp. And Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader that we just recently lost, was he wrote the foreword to that book.
Yeah.
And he was he was Barack Obama's guy. He was a serious politician, and so anyway, that I know is true. Have I ever encountered an ET personally? Yes. Yes, I have. I started telling people about this for a long time. I sat on this because I felt scared to talk about it. I was afraid
Yeah.
of the ridicule, to tell you the truth. I wanted to be known as a ufologist, not, like
Yeah.
a UFO nut. But here's the thing is the deeper you go into this, it all comes down to the entities that are
Yeah.
visiting us. There's nothing more boring than a light in the sky to me anymore. Even though I love that Steve Hillage song, oh my, there's a light in the
In the
sky,
sky.
But when we get light in the sky cases, it's kind of like, well, this might be a UFO, but it might be a drone, it might be a satellite, and whatever it is, it's just boring because it's not doing anything. It's sitting
Yeah.
there. So, but the good cases tend to be entity cases, and when I first became a field investigator, this was 7 years ago, I was very nuts and bolts about this phenomena. I thought that I was going to be studying spacecraft. That's what I thought I was going to be doing. I didn't really believe in the abduction stories. I didn't believe in visitation. I was open-minded about it, but I thought, well, if it happens, it's probably just very random and not very often.
Yeah.
But now, I find
now
that
most different.
Oh, no, if people see a UFO up close, there's a reason for it, and usually it's because they were taken. Oftentimes they don't remember being taken. Sometimes it comes back to them. Sometimes years later it'll come back to them. Sometimes they'll go for hypnotherapy to stop smoking or something else. For to get over grief situations, and this will pop out. As will past life memories. I mean, it's very, very interesting how that works. Pandora's box, kind of, because sometimes you don't want to remember your encounter. I had an encounter, I remember it, or I remember enough of it that I have not been hypnotically regressed. I'm afraid that well, I have no reason to be hypnotically regressed. I remember enough of it to know what happened. I was trying a CE5 meditation. I had been a field investigator for maybe 3 months. I'd closed a few cases. Had not closed an unknown yet. They were all IFOs, drones, and things like that, balloons. Pretty boring stuff. But I believed that, we weren't alone. And I started trying this thing where I was sending out the message, I want to meet you. I want to meet you. I was really persistent about it. And I didn't really think it was going to work, but it was kind of like, what the hell? Why not? Why not?
It doesn't cost you anything to try, does it?
And looking back at it, maybe I would have been picky. Maybe I would have been pickier. But I may have added a couple of words like, I want to meet benevolent and nice. Somebody will take me, maybe take me on a ride, but not, not take my blood and DNA or whatever. But, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. I went upstairs. We lived in Burbank, California, my wife and I at that time. I was sort of lying semi-recumbent on our bed. I had a hip surgery a few months before then. So I was sleeping with a lot of pillows behind my back. So I had just lay down. I was getting ready to fall asleep, but the room started filling with light. And there was no source. It was a sourceless light. It wasn't acting like light is supposed to act. It was almost like a liquid that was being poured into our bedroom. And since this happened, I've heard this from quite a few people, but I experienced it myself before I knew about it. We had a cricket problem. It was an older house. We had sort of a loft bedroom, and we had a cricket problem in the rafters. It was the first time that our room was perfectly silent I could remember. It was just perfectly silent. You couldn't hear traffic sounds outside. It was like a quiet room in a studio. And our house was an old kind of a cabin-y house, built back in the 1940s. It was, not soundproof. I felt very peaceful, unnaturally peaceful. And I'm realizing that I can't move, which would have horrified me normally. And after a little bit, I sort of lost my peaceful feeling, and I did start feeling horrified. But at first, I kind of went with it. Uh, I'm a retired nurse, and I used to take care of quadriplegics. I
Yeah.
took care of quadriplegics for 36-year long nursing career. So as the last thing I would ever want to be is a quadriplegic.
Yeah.
It's like, don't ride motorcycles. If you do, you gotta if you wear a helmet, you'll break your neck. I'll give you a lecture some other time. So you don't want to become a quadriplegic, but that's technically what I felt like. I couldn't move a muscle. This would be impossible. It would be impossible to park a spaceship between our house and our next door neighbor's house. There was maybe 10 feet max there.
Yeah.
Right.
So this had to have been an interdimensional portal that they created. It had to have been a dimensional thing. It would be impossible for it to be otherwise. I watched the wall kind of swirl, almost like pouring cream into a cup of black coffee. And it just dissipated. It was like a hole in the wall where the television used to be. It wasn't there. The bookcase was no longer there. It was like this hole in the wall, and it was bright. There was this brightness and a sense of distance, although I couldn't see any objects in the distance, just this light coming through. There was a tall entity that was standing on the side. I think that of him as sort of like a sentinel in a way.
Yeah.
And these 4 diminutive, bald, hairless, without clothing, it was just gray skin, the little grays with the big black eyes, just they floated up to my bed. They didn't walk. They weren't ambulating up. It was almost as if somebody was on ice skates and you pulled them up. That's how they came up.
Wow.
Speaking with Calvin Parker, I guess that when he and his friend had their encounter in Pascagoula, that it was similar. That they couldn't walk. That it was almost like tree trunks. These guys, I could see legs, but they weren't going to be bothered with walking up. They floated up. They were not communicating with me. I was trying my hardest. I heard that everybody would get like a calming message. We're not going to harm you. We're not going to hurt you. This is for the good of humanity or the good of our race, and it'll be over soon, and you won't be hurt. But I was not getting any communication back. And they were taking blood, and it felt like blood and energy from me. And they literally put tubes on my chest. Did not leave bruises, did not leave marks. I've looked into that as well. Sometimes people will have marks left by something like this, but with me, there was nothing, no evidence, which was frustrating as hell. This whole thing took about 15 minutes, and they pulled away. They were very close up to me. I saw them, it was just, they looked weak. Like if I could have gotten my hands around them, I could have torn them apart.
Yeah.
When I felt their skin touch me, it was almost like the feeling of a marshmallow, or the surface felt like a dolphin. We had like dolphins that you could pet back when, at SeaWorld when I was a kid. And that's what it reminded me of. But it's not like I could reach out and grab or anything. I couldn't move. They left the same way they came in. Not a word, not a thought, nothing shared. I thought they were going to exsanguinate me. I was afraid they were going to kill me because I did not get a calming message. They treated me almost sort of like a lab animal. So they left the same way they came in. They were still looking at me the whole time. They were pulled backwards through this hole in the wall. The hole closed back up the same way that it had opened up. It took maybe 5-6 minutes before I could move. And when I could finally move, I was yelling and screaming like a little girl or, a child. And my wife was really angry. She slept through the whole thing, or they kept her asleep through the whole thing. And her whole comment was, you've joined this crazy UFO group. Is this the kind I have to look forward to in the future? I sure as hell hope not. So here's the funny, I felt really stupid, and I didn't tell anybody. But 2 nights later, my wife has shaken me awake, and I'm the
Yeah.
one who was dead asleep, and I don't
Yeah.
really sleep that well. Again, the room was flooded with light. It was quiet, but she was moving, and she was pacing, and she's saying, Earl, you need to tell your little friends to leave us the F alone. She used
Hello.
the F word, So you need to tell them to leave us the F alone. You need to tell your little friends, I can't live with this kind of stuff happening. And oh my God. Yeah. But I was just, on one hand, I was horrified that, that my wife had met these guys.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's like, well, at least she knows I'm not insane,
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
2 nights later, we both woke up with a room floodlight, no beans this time. Ran to the window, and there was light actually coming down from over our house. Neighbors' lights were turning on, so this time I imagine people could maybe see something, but never heard anything from the neighbors. I was a little scared to go around and ask.
Well,
Yeah, if
just in
now
case.
I would go door to door and ask, "Do you guys see something weird?" But they, here's the thing about our visitors: they control the whole thing. They control the psychology of the people. My wife, all she remembers of this now, she remembers the room flooding with light. She remembers the room flooding with light the second time for her, and us going to the window and seeing it coming from above our house. And we both had this mental, like this telepathic prompt that said, "Oh, it's just a neighbor's porch light," which is rubbish. And my wife and I, we look at each other, we start laughing. It's like, that's not a porch light. We heard this. It was not audible. It was telepathic. It was the only telepathic bit, though, that I got from these guys. It was just trying to disinform us at the end, trying to leave a little note of disbelief for whatever reason. Yeah. But I remember pretty much all of my encounter. I remember being horrified. It was certainly not what I was asking for, although I'm glad it happened. After that happened, well, I went and I told my state director from MUFON at the time, and he did not seem very pleased. He was kind of a nuts and bolts guy, and it was the last thing he wanted to hear was that one of his field investigators had gone wonky on him, and is now a true believer and getting visits from ET. I was literally afraid I was going to be fired. I went to Peter Robbins. I'm trying to think of who to talk with, and Peter Robbins was Bud Hopkins' old assistant. And I'd been introduced to him a couple months before, and Peter was really great. He understood, he got it, and he was able to kind of calm me and give me some good information there. Later on, I met Kathleen Martin, who at the time was running MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team. And I told her about my encounter, and she decided she told me that she wanted me to actually work on the ERT on her team, which I am doing up to today too. I'm still doing that. And so those two were our mentors that were just really helpful going through that. My state director at the time, Jeff Krause, he later on he had some weird encounters, and so now he knows. He knows, and it's unequivocal that. But at the time, it was kind of like we would get reports from somebody would have an encounter, and then they would have multiple UFO sightings, and that was like a red flag. Strangely, now I know that that's not so much a red flag. If there's an encounter, that there's teachable moments that come after that for a lot of people. Why are they doing this? I think that there are different reasons. I think they do still collect DNA. I do think they still check on our health and things like that. But I think that a good portion of what they're doing is it's purposeful ontological shock, that they're trying to pull the rug of reality out from under us so that we're more open and understanding of what the phenomenon is. That would be thinking like Isaac Newton and expect to be flying craft that are quantum, that run on quantum physics,
Yeah.
that we are entering the space age now. And now finally we are a risk for visitors. We are going into their space.
Yeah.
And I think that there's certain groups out there that really would like us to just stay home, that would like us to bomb ourselves back to the Stone Age. It would take care of a problem. But I think that we're blessed that there are certain races out there that do want to see us change and be worthy of our future in the stars. That there is a Star Trek-like future that we can enter eventually, but we have to be worthy of it. We have to stop being warlike. Our petty prejudices, we're prejudiced against humans with just because they have a different skin color, or they believe in a different god, or what, and so how do we expect to meet something that looks like a 9-foot tall praying mantis that maybe the head of a planet, or maybe the spiritual leader of a group, when we're just terrified by skin that's a different color than ours. So there's a lot of work that's being done on humanity, and I think that's kind of anyway, that's why this is happening, I think, or one of the reasons. And there you go. And that's my story. That's that changed my life. I'll tell you. I can go back and I can see these different points in my life where I was changed. One of them was my mom telling me that story back when I was 5 about the deep underground base. And then her, overhearing her talking about Betty and Barney Hill. And interestingly enough, of course, Kathleen Martin is Betty and Barney Hill's niece. So there was that connection. That was the first bit of ontological shock I ever felt. I remember feeling like the sweat coming to my forehead. I was 8 years old. When I would think of life in the universe, I would think of like the Flintstones' Great Gazoo or something cartoon-like, And this was kind of scary. This was, they were sticking a needle in this woman's belly button, And there was a kind of a dark, spooky, paranormal element to it that was surfacing, and that was one of those points. And a face-to-face meeting, well, I'll tell you, if you have any question whether we're alone or not, that will break that door down.
Definitely.
Yeah, I know we're not alone because I've met them.
Right. So we're just going to take a quick break, if that's okay.
Certainly. Yeah,
it's just a 2-minute break so everyone can get a drink on it to the toilet and what have you. So guys, we'll be back in 2 minutes. And we're back.
Back in the room.
Hello.
More questions. We've got more questions.
Got loads of
Sure.
questions.
Let them at me.
Space program. Can you say any more on what you know?
You mean the secret space program? I'm
Secret
guessing.
space program.
Right? Is that what your
Secret
space
Yeah.
program? Just take, bring up NASA.com. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Secret space program. Well, I think that we. I would recommend that you read The Day After Roswell by Philip Corso and Bill Burns. It's, Bill Burns apparently did. He did kind of embellish a few things, but for the most part, Phil Corso said that the book was true and was his story. And when I read that book, a lot of stuff popped up for me that was very familiar from what my mom had been talking about while growing up. And so I think that's a really interesting book about the secret space program, and it goes back to at least the Roswell crash. As soon as we could retrieve stuff from crash retrievals, and I know that that's a true thing. I'm very close friends with the Marcel family, and Jesse Marcel Sr. Was the head security at Roswell. He was the first official on the debris field, which was about a square mile.
Yeah.
It was a huge area. And of course, they talked about the memory metal and that things were trying to come back. That's I've heard is that it seemed like it was trying to reassemble itself at first. And later on, I've heard that this is a thing that UFOs have like an intelligence to themselves. And but I think that we've been trying to reverse engineer what we found at Roswell since at least 1947, when we had this UFO crash. And so this has been over 70 years that we've been, that we've had these materials. And I believe that we have had certain successes with it.
Yeah.
There's Townsend Brown was a scientist back in the 1940s and 1950s who was working on levitation through just highly charged, lifting platforms, and he had success back in the late 40s, early 50s. So if he was having success then, I think that probably the black triangles are ours, just because I have so many people that have seen them. And they all describe what they describe when they get close up to them are things that sound more like a human aircraft. I have one police officer that was 30 feet away from one. He was off duty. He took his dogs out to do their business about midnight, and he notices this dark shape over his neighbor's house. This guy lived at the end of an airfield in Bakersfield, California, and this thing was just hanging there. The lights were out, but he could see it. He could see details. It was that close, and there was a moon out. And he said that he mentioned the indentation on the side where he could see piping in there. It looked like there were air vents, just very things that look like human engineering. And I've heard this from other people too. I've had a few aerospace engineers. Apparently, if you want to see a black triangle, you go to Palmdale, where Plant 42, which is owned by Skunk Works, Lockheed, is. It's known. You can find it on, it's fenced in, and they won't let you on the, on plant, in Plant 42. But this one guy was leaving. He was working late at the Boeing plant, and which is next door to Lockheed. It was 3 a.m. and he sees something coming up that's blotting out the stars again. You hear that quite often.
Yeah.
He stopped his car. He got out and he watched a black triangle fly right over him, perfectly silent. He said it was the most graceful thing he's ever seen. He said that it's just so graceful. It's so beautiful. And he watched the scene hover over Plant 42, and he said that he watched it land behind the gate.
Right.
And this guy had everything to lose, telling his story, everything to lose.
Yeah.
He was scared to talk with me. He was only willing to pursue this far. Again, I checked his credentials, his badge, all that stuff. He was who he said he was. And he finished the conversation by saying, "Would you happen to know how I could get on that project?" It's not the first time I've heard that. It's like, well, no, I don't know. My mom might have been able to help you. She's
Yeah.
gone, for a while. Did my mom ever talk about remote viewing? No, she didn't, but she was very, very interested in ESP. And
Yeah.
and I know people that remote view for the FBI, for the CIA. That our country, our Defense Department is very interested
Oh,
in
yeah.
remote viewing. I know they've got programs at the FBI Quantico headquarters that they are definitely interested in, and they use remote viewing. So yes,
I started reading a book about how to do it, but I'd read a book about a man
Me
that
too.
had been in it, doing it, and then he wrote a book about how to do it, and I thought, I should have gone to university to read this book because it was just so
Russell
complicated.
Targ, by any chance? He's
Yes, that's the one.
there. You
Yeah.
go. Yes. I like Russell. And Ingo Swann was another guy.
Yeah.
I think that it just takes a lot of persistence, that you have to
Yeah.
be able to shut down and concentrate.
Yeah.
But everybody
Not
has
just a
the
case of
ability.
meditation.
Every single human has the ability
Yeah.
to be telepathic. What I've been told from one friend of mine, who's a very interesting friend, that does do remote viewing for the Pentagon, is the way that she teaches. She's trying to teach her children how to do this, and what she'll
Right.
do is she'll be driving, and she'll say, they'll get mad at somebody because they're going too slow, and she says, "Don't get mad. Just send the thought. Be polite in
Yeah.
your thought, because if you do it angrily, you'll get a bad reaction. But be
Negative,
really
yeah.
polite and ask them to please move over." And she got her kids to do this, and it works really well. Our kids
Yeah.
are learning how to become telepathic. I've been told that this is the great disability of humanity, that for some reason we are one of those. It's just something strange happened in our evolution, where we just never developed the telepathy like other races have.
No, we had it and we've lost it.
Yeah, maybe it may be something that was lost in prehistoric times. I know that we see with a lot of different entities, they don't speak. Their mouths have become just kind of slits and not
Yeah.
operational, and no evidence of vocalizations or vocal cords, and that may be that's probably a side effect. The fact that we learned to sing. I've been
Yeah.
told that music is a universal, that you'll find it on other worlds,
Yeah.
but that song is something that's a human thing that we developed. Telling stories with music and vocalizing this, and that is beautiful and wonderful. I'm a Beatleholic, right? You'll see I got the Yellow Submarine behind, the little Yellow Submarine and all that good stuff. And I'm one of those guys that when I bought the new Let It Be box set when Giles Martin, remixed it, and I've watched the Get Back thing, like all 8 hours of it 3 times now. Freaking love music. I'm a musician myself. I couldn't imagine living without it. But it may have had its downside. It may have been one of the things that kept us from developing telepathy, because every other race, the way that they would, share emotions and love or anger or anything else would be telepathically. For us, we develop poetry and speech and song to do the same thing. Yeah. What's my thoughts on reptilians among us, Earl? There are, from what I've been told, there are all manner of creatures that live among us. Most of them use avatar bodies. Some will use their minds to give themselves a human facade that we see, that's real enough that we don't question it. As far as the government being taken over by reptilians, I haven't seen any evidence for that. To me, it's like you got to be careful with the QAnon stuff, because there's a lot of disinformation out there. I've heard that there are good reptilians, and that there are warlike reptilians that don't care for us very much. I actually have a case that I closed that I'm pretty convinced is real, where it's a reptilian hybrid, a reptilian human hybrid. She has her pupils are like snake eyes,
Yeah.
or like little diamond shaped pupils. Uh, Sort of what you consider bad skin.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hope you're not listening, my friend. But a lovely, wonderful person, intelligent, a scientist,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
But she's convinced, she has memories of she was born with birth defects, and her father was was he a SEAL, I believe, and so they offered to help her by giving her alien blood, and I think that it was probably a governmental test that they were doing. And very interesting person. I've known her now for a good 3 years, and I have no reason to suspect it's otherwise. And plus, you see her
Yeah.
pupils.
Yeah.
You know, there's certain medical conditions that could cause something sort of like that, but these are just, it looks very, very natural, you know.
Yeah.
What somebody's asking me, Nancy Malcolm, Earl, what relationship do you see with UFOs, ETs, and other dimensional beings like ghosts?
Excellent.
Oh yeah, I think that there's absolutely that there a connection between the paranormal and UFOs and ETs. I think that perhaps where we've dropped the ball is that we consider it paranormal rather than we need to expand our idea of what normal is.
Yeah.
There does seem to be an afterlife element with our ETs, like they know about what's coming up, where we, kind of guess and, come up with religions and stuff to deal with it. Whitley Strieber, I think, is kind of in the know with a lot of that stuff. I have a lot of respect for Whitley. I've met him and
Yeah.
really like the gentleman. And he kind of started off very nuts and bolts, and he's gone all spiritual and for a reason.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a connection. Also, I believe that our that ETs that they use portals to get here, to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And when you open a portal, all manner of things come through
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
So you get cryptids, you get ghosts, spirits, you get what have you.
A bit of everything.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Not that you want them, but
Yeah,
I'm
and you
guessing
have
they
to
get
be
through
careful
anyway.
with it because there can be a hitchhiker, the Skinwalker
Yeah.
book that just came
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
There could be a hitchhiker effect,
Yeah.
with stuff attachments that you might not want to deal with.
Yeah. I was going to say
Has
that.
Earl heard of the reports of people being found deceased in ceiling cavities? Huh, like the gentleman who went missing in the hospital. Wow, I haven't heard. I don't know about that one. Now, I guess I will have to look that up.
Yeah.
It's Space Cadet Lottie. If you can post on, if you want to post a link to that, I will go after the show to YouTube in the comments, and I'll click on it if you can find me a link. Do you think there's any link? This is from Joe Weeks. Do you think there's any link between aliens and Dogman Bigfoot? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think shapeshifters, especially, read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And I know that that's not malarkey. That's a reality. I think that perhaps for some of these entities to be able to do superhuman things, that there may be a balance, an energy balancing thing that takes place where they have to shape shift, and that's why you see the big 9 foot tall wolves on two legs, or the dogmen. And people do see the Bigfoot, and you hear I've heard them described as pilots. In fact, George Lucas, he had Chewie as the pilot
Lucky.
of the
Yeah.
as a pilot of Millennium Falcon for a
Yeah.
reason. You'd heard these stories, so yeah, that there is a link, I believe, and it's crazy. I mean, I'll tell you, I did not believe the Skinwalker stuff, but now I know. It
Yeah.
is, I know the people that were involved in it. I've heard the stories, and I've even seen a video of somebody shape shifting. So that's
Yeah.
not there anymore. But does Earl feel that from Warren Hardcastle, that's a good British name, Does
It is.
Earl? Yeah, I know. Isn't that that's a Warren Hardcastle? Does Earl feel that there is a link with the missing 411 and aliens? Yeah, probably. They're not all benevolent.
No.
Those that are visiting us. There are some there are some encounters that come off like a horror story, and I have no reason to think that isn't a thing, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a comment. The next one's a comment for you from Ancient Ruby.
From Ancient Ruby, it is in your blood, Earl. You're meant to be doing what you do, but be careful who you speak to.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know. A good friend of mine, Greg, Greg Bishop, he's written a book called Project Beta, as well as he's written a few wonderful books. But Project Beta is about Paul Benowitz and how the Pentagon messed with him. And actually, he was a scientist, and they made him go insane by feeding him disinformation. He would then, unfortunately, he had the propensity to take it really, really personally, and personified it, and all they had to do is feed him so much stuff, and he kind of made himself go nuts. So I do know that there are, but Greg, what he told me a long time ago, because he had to become friends with Rick Doty, who is a CIA operative, and we know that he called himself a disinformation agent at one point. But according to Greg, if you want to learn anything, you got to play the game. So you have to learn to be able to take two realities and be willing to live with them and say, well, this may be complete, utter BS, or it might be the truth. And I may never know, but I'm willing to hold on to those different possibilities. Majestic 12, things like that. I mean, it's in our, in ufology, you hear about it. And then others say that this was made up, this committee, that, Stanton Friedman certainly thought that Majestic 12 was a thing. I know other people that swear that it's disinformation. You just have to be able to be willing to hold on to two possibilities and settle for that. And that's what I do. So I'm not afraid. I haven't had any of the hitchhiker effect stuff in my encounters with people or possible ETs. And I've had, I've been introduced to a few very interesting people.
Yeah.
Umbra Man, why do we have to be worthy and non-warlike if Dracos and others seemingly don't? Yeah, it doesn't seem fair, does it? They came before us, I guess, and now they have different rules. But yeah, I think you're right. I wonder about that too. But yeah, it's not really fair. But that's what they expect from us. Nancy Malcolm, did your mom ever mention an agreement between humans and the ET after Roswell? No, my mom, she wouldn't speak. She wouldn't give me details about stuff, unfortunately. I asked her about Bob Lazar. I had the composure of mind back in 1998 or so to ask her about Bob Lazar. And she said, who, Bob Lazar? She played dumb. I figure she kind of knew him. She had an interesting, there's one guy who I know that can absolutely confirm my mom and what she did. Was a friend of mine from high school called Robert, who is still with us. And his mom was my math teacher. I'm terrible at math. I was terrible at math when I was a little kid. I mean, I was so, and I would frustrate her because I wouldn't do my homework. And I remember making me put my desk outside and on a kind of a rainy day and stuff like that, But when I was in my teenage years, Robert, her son, was a walking computer. Okay. He was a guy who could take a column of numbers and he would have the answer for you in 2 seconds. He did calculus for fun. It's one of the first people I ever met that actually owned a Texas calculator.
Yeah.
That was like his big, like most kids would want a car, a hot rod. He wanted the Texas Instruments calculator. But my mom, they were apparently had a problem. Northrop was having a problem with their mainframe computer, is what I found out later on. So she got my friend Robert and sent him out there because they had tried everything and nobody could fix their problem. Nobody could actually find out what the problem was. So anyway, he was gone for about 2 months and his mom got worried. I heard from her and she said, "Where's my son? What did your mom do with my son?" It's like, I asked her, it's like, well, she just got him the job for Northrop. I don't know where he is at, Well, he came back like a week after the frantic phone call with a car. He actually did buy a car. So they rewarded him well. And he had cash, on him.
Yeah.
He was young. He was in his teenage years. He's a year older than me. But a real, kind of a proud to be a nerd kind of a guy. Well, he brought out like a computer readout sheet. It was like the green and white with the black.
Stripes.
Yeah, right. Folded. And he said, "You want to see what I did?" He said, "Watch this." And so he it's folding down onto the sidewalk. And if he finds this number that he circled with an orange grease pencil, right? It was before you really saw the markers, flare, felt tip markers. This grease pencil. And he said, this number here screwed up their whole system. It stopped Northrop in their tracks for 3 months. He said, I went there and I was able to figure it out, but it was this number. I had to, find out what it was. It was causing their computer system to freeze. So that was a kind of, my mom would kind of commission people to do stuff like that. And so I thought, well, maybe Bob Lazar was like that, because I don't think he is a physicist or a PhD. He doesn't sound like one. He doesn't really. I know PhDs, and that's their complaint about Bob Lazar. Well, he doesn't talk like a PhD, and he could get he could go and he could get a doctorate. If they stole that from him, he just has to go and challenge the board so he can get it back. My feeling is that perhaps he was just a genius like my friend. He was unschooled, except for, now I know a guy that used to drop him off over at Caltech here. A good friend of mine who has no reason to lie about that. I know he's friends with Bob. But I asked him, I said, well, do you know that if Bob was actually enrolled in that class? Because he didn't really come from money, And he said, that I don't know. I mean, you can sit in a university class and not actually be enrolled in it, And so my guess is that he soaked up a lot of what he knew, and they knew that he thought differently, and they threw him at their problem at S4 at Area 51.
Yeah.
But my mom wouldn't confirm that for me. Ancient Ruby, Earl, what did your ET encounter teach you? Did they instruct you? Thank you. And thank you. What it taught me was that they control this whole thing, for one thing. I think that they can actually create a little bubble universe, and that's how they can do the stuff that seems impossible to us. That their technology is so far advanced that it seems like voodoo or magic to us, but it's just high technology.
Yeah.
It's just maybe a million years, more along the line than our own technology. I've had many teachable moments since I had my encounter. I did see I saw a UFO at one point, but it was not. It was shown to me for a reason. The closer I got to it, I was not in control of what I was doing, in that I did not grab my phone. I didn't take photos. I would have had the smoking gun video of this thing. It looked sort of like this. It was boxy looking. It looked rusted and old, like it had been there forever, but it looked weighty, and it like the tonnage must have, it was the size of a fighter plane. And it was hanging 40 feet over the ground. And I'm driving up to it. I'm looking for how they hoaxed this UFO sighting, right? And there are no cables. It was defying gravity. The closer I got to the object, it started foreshortening and it changed its shape. And by the time I was maybe, 50 feet away from it or so, it looked like it was another mile away and the size of
Right.
a football field. The same
Yeah.
shape, same object at that point, but it was, and it didn't move. So to me, it showed that this sighting was given to me. It was for my eyes only. It was in my mind. It was to teach. It was a teachable moment.
Yeah.
To show me that they're in control. I suddenly I just felt like I have to go to work. I'm going to be late to work, and I'm 2 miles away. And then I'm back, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm the worst field investigator ever. I need to quit. I need to fire myself. But thankfully, since then I've learned that other investigators have had the same effect happen, and they're in control. Nickname is asking me, has Earl an interest in any UK cases at all? Yes, I'm very interested in the UK cases. In fact, my friends Phil and Ron Kinsella, who I subbed for today, are very close friends, and they told my story in their new in Philip's new book.
Yeah.
I guess the next book that Ron is going to be publishing, he did some illustrations of my story. So I love Paul Sinclair. I love his work.
Yeah.
I know that his work with that there's the British Skinwalker Ranch that he's working with, and I find that just so fascinating.
Yeah.
And I know George Knapp, who is one of the authors of Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, is very, very interested in Paul's work there.
Yeah.
That it's a thing.
Yeah. It just seems to be so strange that it's concentrated on that area of East Yorkshire. I mean, it's only 70 miles from me.
Wow.
Where Paul's area is, where actually me and another group are going over in March for a long weekend. We've hired one of these big static caravans. We're going to go investigating up there, so that'll be good.
Fantastic. I love Paul's work. His proof, truth books are wonderful, and does fantastic work. I had a couple hour conversation with him about a month ago, and great guy. Patricia Adams Wright is asking, Earl, have you ever taken an abduction report from a child? A teenager, a couple of teenagers. I've had many cases. I have one case as a Homeland Security agent, head of the TSA at one of our major airports here in LA, Los Angeles area, and most abduction cases, the ones that are ongoing, they usually start when somebody's around 7 years of age, and then they're just recurring.
Yeah.
And my friend, we call him Andy because we have to keep, for his job's sake. And even though he's planning on going public now, he's tired of hiding it. He feels like, well, if they fire me, so it goes. Because this is a reality, and he feels like the skills that he's learned as a Homeland Security agent are going to help him perhaps to even protect ETs someday, or hybrids. That's one fear that I think could become a reality, is that there's such xenophobia in humanity right now, even just among ourselves. And this is becoming a known quantity, that we are not alone and that they are here living among us.
Yeah.
The couple of people that I've met have been peaceful, have been good, and are pro humanity. So I don't see any evil or any wickedness there whatsoever. But I think that there's such xenophobia in humanity that they may need protectors at some point, bodyguards, stuff.
I'd agree with that.
That's the way my friend sees himself. He feels like someday that he was given that message that he's eventually going to be protecting them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Andy's got a question for you.
Yeah, sure. Black-eyed kids.
I've heard of the Black Eye Kids cases. I've never
Yeah.
seen one.
Have you not?
If they're out there, I haven't seen one myself. I know my friend Denise Stoner and her mother were in a grocery store, and she swears that she saw a black-eyed kid.
Right.
And Denise is not one to make stuff up. She's
No.
one of my closest colleagues in the ERT.
Yeah.
It works with and writes with Kathleen Martin, who is one of my mentors. So that would be who to talk with about the black-eyed children. Has seen evidence of that.
Right. Yeah. So just going on to that, so when she seen him, was it like a crowded area, or were they on their own?
It was a crowded area, but I believe that this was an infant that she saw. It was in a pram.
Oh, right. Okay.
A stroller, as we would call it
Yeah.
over the pond.
So
Yeah.
a toddler.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's an interesting story. She didn't even tell that to me. I read that in the periodical.
Right.
It's like then I had to call her up. It's like, God, you didn't tell me about this one. She's had some high strangeness. I mean, she and her husband and her special needs daughter, their RV caravan was taken up. And the odometer, they were dropped like 80 miles away from where they were picked up. They had 3 hours of missing time. They were supposed to be at a family reunion. Everybody was scared, calling the police and stuff. But somehow or another, their caravan was 80 mile, what would be like 110 kilometers further than it was supposed to be, and it did not show up on the odometer. Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. That's Denise's life. So if anybody's going to have the propensity to see a black-eyed child, that would be Denise.
It's going to be a
yeah.
Excellent. Right, we've got one more question. This is from Umbraman. What are your thoughts on Dan Burish and his time-traveling Stargate information and J-Rod?
Boy, I love that book. I don't know. It sounds pretty darn accurate to me. I haven't really seen anybody disprove his book yet.
Yeah.
And there's certain things in there that I've heard other people reiterate that were not associated with Dan Burish. I sadly never got to meet the man. But I find it a very interesting story, and I have no reason to disbelieve it. It seems to go along with what I have learned, before I read his story and since. So, and of course, it has to do with a deep underground military base, doesn't it? Yeah. I keep finding out about. I guess that the deep underground military bases, they're sort of secret, but sort of not. They're getting kind of. I know there's one in Temecula that it's been confirmed for me. It's just like multiple levels, over 20 different levels to it.
Yeah.
I am very. I even know the name. It's called Tejon Ranch. Tejon. And people that are not involved in the UFO circuit or have even told me about it. So Nancy Malcolm is asking if ETs produce thought forms like humans do. Could some cryptids be thought forms? I imagine probably so. I think that they're very, very telepathic. I think that some of the ETs that live among us the disguise that they have is mentally projected on themselves.
Right.
And I've heard, a couple of interesting stories about that, where people have seen them purposefully drop their phone, show their real visage here and there. That's a thing, like the great British ufologist Timothy Good wrote about that kind of a scenario. So it's a hero of mine. Diane Alexander is asking me, Earl, do you think we live in a simulation? I don't know. I mean, what's a simulation? Reality, I mean, an atom is mostly empty empty space,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you've got the nucleus and you've got, a little proton going around, and everything else is just, there's nothing there. It's empty. So it's almost like, what is a simulation? I mean, it's so tenuous, that which we call, solidity, set in stone, yet, you take granite, tungsten, or any of the heavy metals, there's still just like it's mostly empty space. That's just, we know that through physics. So it could be a simulation. It would explain certain things. Maybe how God plays video games, I mean, I love, again, I'm going to bring up another Arthur C. Clarke thing. I love Clarke, and something I will tell you guys. I grew up reading Arthur C. Clarke's books. When I was 10 years old, I insisted that my parents took me to see 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
I got to see it at Cinerama, and it made a huge impression on me. And I love Arthur Clarke's stories and books. But he was he was emphatic that UFOs were not real in his books. Well, I found out through my friend Paul Hynek. He's Alan Hynek, who is head of Project Blue Book. Paul is his son. And he has apparently, J. Allen Hynek and Arthur C. Clarke were very good friends. They were pen pals.
Yeah.
And he has all those letters. He has the correspondence. And I was able to read them personally. And there's Arthur's little scrawl. I know what it looks like because I have a couple of signed editions from Arthur Clarke. And right in there, you're saying, I think that your work on Project Blue Book is amazing. And I do think that UFOs are real. And I think that some of them are from other planets. He said, I can't say that because I'd never get invited to another moonshot. But but that was Arthur Clarke, the great British, head of the Planetary Society and the great British science fiction author. I was so thrilled to find that out about him.
I think growing up watching him, I think that's what sparked a lot of my interest in like everything, really, because he just went into depth about everything, and he knew his
Childhood's End. Read Childhood's End if you want to read about a possible alien invasion, but one that actually has a benevolent behind it, but they see things different. Their idea of benevolent is different from ours. I mean, humanity needs to be changed. And it's an amazing book. I think it's probably true. I think Clarke knew a lot. I think he knew it. And he certainly thought that UFOs were real. I've seen the correspondence to prove it.
Yeah.
Carl Sagan, I mean, I think a lot of people were forced to drop the ball on UFOs. You know that Carl Sagan's first published paper was about ancient alien theory. He said that if you wanted to find out if there is intelligent life in the universe, you should get archaeologists to do deep digs, that eventually you'll find proof that way. And I was told that Carl Sagan was taken aside and told, matter of fact, that you have a great future in astronomy if you drop this subject.
Yeah.
You can either carry on with this subject or else you can drop it. This is not a real thing. And, he wound up running JPL over here. Yeah. One of my field investigators has worked at JPL. In fact, two of them, So the government treats it a little differently than they did back then, I think. Michio Kaku seems to be quite friendly towards the idea of the ET hypothesis and UFOs being real, which I'm very happy about. Yes.
I've got a question for you. Do you get a lot of reports about USOs as well as UFOs?
Oh, yes.
Well, we live in the hot spot for that.
Yes, I do. Well, I had a recent case where there was a commercial pilot. He and his wife were camping over on East Catalina Island, which is kind of the rugged area that's further away from Avalon, and there's more build-up areas and more wilderness type areas.
Yeah.
So they had a tent set up there. It was the two of them, and his brother-in-law was with them. This guy's commercial pilot for many, many years. Used to flying over the California coastline. He knew it like the back of his hand. He was very good at line of sight and dead reckoning. He had to be. So he's out there on the beach looking out, and he sees what looks like a golden moon come up out of the water. He said that it looked like it was about 10 miles away, and it was huge. He said it must have been hundreds of feet in circumference. And he watched the solid golden, colored lit orb come out of the water, and it started doing a crossways pattern flying in the sky. It hovered there for a few seconds then, and it went back into the water. He called his wife out and his brother-in-law. He got 2 other sets of eyes. It emerged from the water, and it started doing the same pattern. The pilot was able to give me the exact coordinates. He knew the latitude and the longitude. He was able to figure that out for me. And so I went to, I recently had lunch with Kevin Day, who is the strike force commander on the Princeton during the Tic Tac encounter. And he said that those coordinates that the pilot gave me are the exact same coordinates that the Tic Tac was found at. So there's something underwater there. That's Kevin and myself, and that's his girlfriend Kim. Is a lovely woman.
Yeah.
And that's the ocean. If you go keep on going, you'll get to Catalina Island there.
Yeah.
Kevin is such an interesting guy, and his whole story is very interesting. There's a thing called the Vallée-Davis effect. That when you're close to a UFO or you encounter beings, that it's almost like a contagion, that it changes you, that in effect it changes you so that you're sort of like an ET yourself. People manifest strange gifts, intuition that they never had. For me, I experience synchronicities, just strange, meaningful coincidences. I'll be thinking of an author, I'll get a phone call from the author, and I've never met the person, or somebody that was involved in the whole Skinwalker thing that I didn't know, and suddenly I get a phone call from them, or I meet them, and sometimes they're just silly coincidences, but they always seem very meaningful. For Kevin, he's had other manifestations. One thing that they noticed when he was on the radar deck, he said this is a part of his story that he hasn't talked about a whole lot. That there was one point where the commanding officer was ordering them to shoot on the Tic Tac, that he wanted them to go after the Tic Tac with ordnance, and that it was absolute insanity, he said, on the deck, that people were running around and freaking out.
Yeah.
But suddenly it seemed as though the timeline shifted, reality shifted. And I think that perhaps our world's timeline was changed there.
Yeah.
Because suddenly he said everybody was calm. The guy that was running around with his hands in the air, ordering them to shoot on this thing, was not even on that. That it would suddenly become very, very calm. And this is an example of the Vallée-Davis effect. Apparently, there have been other instances where, even in his dreams, he's brought back apports and things, ancient coins, and this is a manifestation. The being that they call the Skinwalker has that ability.
Yeah.
And it's something that people from the Pentagon are they're watching them, and they warn them, be careful about your emotions, be careful about what you wish for, be careful with your thoughts, because your thoughts can actually manifest if you're not careful. Now that's just out there, isn't it? One more question, it says, from Joe Weeks. Can they all cloak, Earl, as many say they have seen something like the Predator film? I don't know if they can all cloak, but I think that humans have learned how to cloak. I mean, if you read the book Chameleon, oh goodness, what's the author's name? It'll come to me. There's a book called Chameleon. spelled like chameleon, but with the
Yeah.
O at the end, that talks about, and it's not a fictional book. It takes place in the San Diego area. And I've looked, and it talks about us having invisibility technology to where we could send out a platoon that you would never see.
No.
Now, I've heard of invisibility. Talked with one guy that was on an aircraft carrier where they showed him an invisible plane, or they didn't show him an invisible plane.
Yeah.
He heard it. He heard it land. He felt the jets.
Yeah.
Could see the afterburners, but you couldn't see a plane.
Yeah.
And I think it's back projection stuff. I mean, it's actually a pretty simple technology with the little micro, cameras we have now. So you could more or less make a suit with cameras and just project what's behind you in front.
Yeah.
Like
green screen.
And so, and I've looked into this, and I have a friend who shall remain nameless, but knows head of the San Diego Naval Base there, and indeed, he says that we've got that, so. So I'm sure that they can do the same thing.
Just before we go, then, what are your plans for the near future? What have you got coming up?
Oh goodness. Well, we have the MUFON Symposium that's coming up in July. I was on the symposium, the little administration group. That was a huge honor. I was asked by Mark Kita, who's the head of the symposium, if I would be on their, the group that chose the speakers. So, so that's coming up in July, and Peter Robbins is going to be there. We've got Kathleen Martin, Paul Hynek and his brother Joel Hynek are both scheduled to be speaking, which is a first. And I believe it's a possibility that we may get the 3 Marcel siblings. I really worked on that. It depends on what their television contract says, but they think that they're going to be free to do it. So it's going to be a great symposium. Going to be in Denver, Colorado, and if you have a vacation coming up in the States, that's the one to take. It's July this year. So. And other than that, I'm just very busy with. I'm busy teaching. I teach a college class in ufology. It's a accredited class at Otis College of Art and Design. I teach it with a folklorist PhD, and she sort of lets. I'm technically the mentor, but she sort of treats me like a second prof. So that keeps me busy on all my Tuesdays, and I'm a busy guy.
Still no freelance to pick a guitar up.
I'm so sad. I just haven't had time to play much lately. I've got to fix that. But
well, I think next time you come on, you should give us a tune.
Sure, I could do that. I could do that.
We'll have a little guitar riff to start with.
We can do the. You can do the intro, the break, and the outro if you like.
That'd be
great.
But
great.
Next time.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Right. Well, stay right there because we're going now. So thank you so much, Earl, for coming in.
I should say, if you've seen a UFO or you've had an encounter out there, the listenership, just go to MUFON.com. You can report your UFO, and someone like myself will go and investigate that for you. If you've had an encounter and you want to speak with somebody from the ERT who's non-judgmental, there's a form for that as well. Brilliant. And there you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Massive thank you. Such short notice as well. Really
thank you for all the questions.
It's been a great guest.
Thank you so much.
Joe for doing the modding. Deb.
Say hello to Phil and his brother for me when you see them.
Definitely. So massive thank you for everyone for coming on. All the new subscribers. We are on next Wednesday for the decode, which is the first Wednesday of the month.
Yes.
So that'll be on at 8:00, and then following Friday of the same week, we are accompanied by Deborah. Come on.
we've got Chris Meeks on from Scottish
Hey.
Paranormal Podcast.
Oh, there
and
you
it's
go.
my
Remembered.
birthday.
Happy
Earl,
birthday.
Thank
you
you.
forget every single week who we've got on the next week.
Yeah, well, I didn't this week, did I?
Yeah. So yeah,
Right, so
massive.
we'll see you on Wednesday then.
Yeah. See you on Wednesday. Massive thank you to everyone again. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye.
Bye.